Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Thursday, July 28th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight. The U.S. economy shrank for another quarter. We'll discuss it with President Obama's former top economic advisor, Austan Goolsbee. Is he as confident as the Treasury Secretary about avoiding a recession?
We've entered a new phase in our recovery, focused on achieving steady, stable growth without sacrificing the gains of the last 18 months.
Senate Democrats are advancing a major spending package, including hundreds of billions of dollars to fight climate change. What are its chances? And why did it catch so many senators by surprise? Also, at least 8 people are dead after devastating floods in Kentucky. We'll have the latest on the recovery effort. And what could Yankees Hall of Famer Derek Jeter teach us about greatness? A new series shows how he worked through adversity to lead a dynasty. The director of The Captain joins us live. Lately, it seems just about everything has been costing more and more. Gas and groceries and housing and on and on and on. Now, technically, the United States is not in a recession right now, technically. But are we heading for one? Today, we learned that America's gross domestic product fell for a second straight quarter, this time by 0.9%. This kind of a dip, one that's lasted 2 quarters in a row, approaches a common definition of a recession. The National Bureau of Economic Research is the official arbiter of recessions in the U.S. The group has yet to make that call. It's unclear if it will. But these new numbers come one day after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates again. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell asserted that the U.S. is not in a recession. So, what do these latest indicators mean for everyday people? Let's begin tonight with Austan Goolsbee. He chaired the Council of Economic Advisors during the Obama administration. Today, he is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Professor Goolsbee, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
First of all, just explain that statistic, that the gross domestic product fell by 0.9%. For people with zero economic education, what does that mean?
Well, so you add up everything that the economy produced, and it, in real terms, corrected for inflation, it went down at an annual rate of around 1%. So that's not a great statistic, and if you get substantial drops in GDP for a consistent basis, that's usually marks the beginning of a recession. The thing that's got people confused is in this same period, which is April, May, June, we put up massively positive job numbers. So we expanded 400,000 jobs a month at the same time the GDP was going down. That's basically never happened before, and that's why you saw Chair Powell, and that's why you saw the administration saying, wait a minute, this is not a recession if we're adding hundreds of thousands of jobs a month, but there's still definitely a risk when the Fed is doing what it's doing now.
Also, in the chart that we showed during our intro, you could see that the GDP before these 2 quarters had been going up quarter after quarter before these 2 quarters of decreases. We've also had a number of quarters of job growth. There you can see in 2021, significant GDP increases. In these last 2 quarters, some smaller GDP decreases. I wonder how you are viewing these factors in terms of the conversation about whether or not we're in a recession. As you said, there's a lot of different things that would bear on using the R word.
Yeah, the thing about the R word is it's usually not that hard once you get the real data to figure out if it's a recession. It's a broad-based slowdown of the economy. So you see unemployment goes up, jobs go down, GDP goes down, industrial production goes down. All of those things happen. And this time, I think because we're coming out of such a weird cycle having to do with COVID, those things don't agree. They've diverged in a way that doesn't look like a recession, but definitely still makes people a little afraid. They ought to be on edge, because if you look since World War II, since we've been keeping track of the data, there have been 14 recessions. And by far the most common cause of recessions, more than 2/3 of the recessions were caused by the Fed raising interest rates faster than the economy can handle. So now you look, this week the Fed is raising interest rates as fast as they have ever raised them. And that's got a lot of people concerned that these big positive jobs numbers that we saw in the beginning of the year, that might slow down or even reverse, in which case then you really would be talking about recession.
I'm always fascinated by economics because it feels like it's partly mathematical and kind of about the levers of the economy and partly sociological, very much about who we are as people and how we view our wealth and scarcity and demand and supply. And I wonder how much this talk about recession is less about just the economy on paper and more about us, more about how we're dealing with America, coexisting with COVID, with the war in Ukraine, with concerns about China and how that bears on the U.S. We'll talk about that in a minute, as opposed to just something we can look at on the numbers and go, yep, it's a recession. We know what to deal with. It feels like it means something vastly different now with everything going on.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's an interesting insight. I thought you were going to say something far more insulting, that economics is half statistics and half something, but I didn't know what the something was going to be.
No, why would I? Now, come on, Professor, why would I say such a thing? I wouldn't bring you on national television to insult you like this.
These numbers reflect the consumer confidence. They reflect the sociology, in your term, of how people are feeling, and how they're feeling can have a self-fulfilling prophecy if everybody looks around and starts telling each other and telling themselves, oh, this is going to be bad, and they pull back on spending, it will make it bad. So there is always a little bit of a messaging dynamic in that sense that people say might be self-fulfilling prophecy. But the other thing to recognize is sometimes those spirits, the feeling, the vibes, they don't have to match the numbers. And if you go back a long ways, say to the 1992 presidential election, if you were paying attention at that time, the whole election was about the recession and how the President Bush was mismanaging the recession. If you go back and look at the numbers now, the recession ended in 1991. There was no recession in 1992, but that was the vibe. And you can get in dynamics like that, and we don't know if we're in one now.
Before I have to let you go, I'm looking at the Dow futures and the S&P futures right now. They're all up. There have been some strong quarterly earnings reports. The S&P 500 futures are up right now. I feel like whether or not we end up in a recession, it's going to feel different on Wall Street than on Main Street. How should everyday people think about where we're going, as opposed to, say, where private equity firms and REITs and day traders are thinking about this, before we go?
Yeah, look, the thing is, in 2020, we had one day where they announced the economy lost 20 million jobs in a single month. It was the worst day in the history of the American job market. Stock market went up that day. So I don't think we should use the stock market as our indicator of what the economy is going to feel like to everyday people. I think if we have a recession, it's going to be awful. Recessions are never good. So let's hope we don't have a recession and that the Fed is able to manage what they call the soft landing. That is to bring down inflation without making the unemployment rate go way up, without generating recession, because costs of housing, costs of buying a car, probability of losing a job, all of those things go the wrong way when you get into a tough cycle like that.
Chicago professor Austan Goolsbee, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. I appreciate your insights, and I respect your profession as an economist. Thank you very much for making time for us.
Always fun to talk. Thanks.
President Biden's Build Back Better plan is back under a new name. Today, he spoke in support for a new bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. It addresses everything from prescription drug costs to climate change. The measure calls for raising more than $700 billion in tax revenue while reducing the federal deficit by $300 billion. In remarks at the White House, the president told Congress to pass it.
My message to Congress is this. This is the strongest bill you can pass to lower inflation, cut the deficit, reduce health care costs, tackle the climate crisis, and promote energy security. All the time while reducing the burdens facing working class and middle class families. So pass it. Pass it for the American people. Pass it for America. I'll have more to say in this later. Now I want to thank Leader Schumer and Manchin, Joe Manchin, Senator Manchin, for the extraordinary effort that it took to reach this result.
Notice he name-checked Joe Manchin. That's partly because Build Back Better stalled, because it failed to get support of more moderate Democrats like Senator Joe Manchin. But he has already announced his support. That doesn't ensure that it will pass, but it could raise the chances. Let's get into all of that with NBC senior politics reporter Jonathan Allen. And John, tell us more about what this bill would do. It sounds like, from the way that the president described it, it would do a little bit of a lot of things.
Well, I think from the president's perspective, as a salesman, it heals a broken world and and puts America back on track. If you take a look at it with some broader perspective, it's about a quarter of what he wanted to do originally, maybe a little closer to half, depending on which point you take from originally. But the big thing are they're going to raise $700 billion plus over 10 years. Most of that is going to come from a corporate minimum tax of 15%. You're going to see a reduction in drug pricing. So that also actually is, interestingly, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs is positive from a budget perspective, meaning that it is a reduction for the deficit. And then they're going to spend a bunch of money, most of that on energy investments, trying to control climate change, and put, roughly half the money, a little bit less than half the money, into deficit reduction.
Let's talk about the support of those moderate Democrats. As we said, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia says that he will support it. Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona was much more tight-lipped about it, didn't want to talk about it when reporters confronted her earlier today. Take a look.
So, Senator, are you not going to say where you are until after the parliamentarian reviews it?
Like we said, she doesn't have comments. She's going to be reviewing the text, and she'll have to see what the parliamentarian process produces.
Do you have a timeline for reviewing the text?
Do you believe it can get passed by next week?
Can I please get in the car? Guys, as we said, she doesn't have comments.
Senators are never lonely on Capitol Hill, always followed by the gaggle. But the gaggle is following her for a good reason. Senators like her and Senator Manchin have hamstrung other legislative efforts before. So what is it that got Joe Manchin on board?
Well, it's interesting. Manchin has always wanted to be part of a deal, has said that he wanted to be part of a deal, has continued to negotiate for a long time, despite taking a lot of arrows from White House officials, from Senator Schumer, who once criticized Manchin, and then it turned out that Schumer had signed a memorandum of understanding with Manchin about what Manchin's outlines were. But I think ultimately Manchin wants to be seen as somebody who's a player, somebody who's seen as a deal maker, and he likes to talk about how, even though he doesn't always get along with everybody in his party, he is fundamentally a Democrat. And so I think those were all incentives for him. And, in addition to that, no small thing, he's not likely to see in his lifetime a more moderate Democratic presidential nominee than Joe Biden. And so, not helping Biden move his agenda, not helping him for the midterms, not helping him for his next election, I think really, strengthens the wing of the party that Joe Manchin doesn't come from.
Does this help the Democrats for the midterms? I feel like there is a big difference in political strategy between how Democrats and Republicans are trying to kind of make their case to the public, obviously, where if you think about Republican political imperatives lately, they've been very big, bold-faced headlines like the Don't Say Gay bill or the Texas abortion bill. Big, bold-faced, simple. It's like a TV guide headline. You can explain it in a sentence. This bill does a lot of different things. And it makes me wonder, if a Democratic voter is able to even articulate what it is about this bill that they love that makes them go vote for their local Democratic member of the House or Democratic lawmaker in a local election. Like, what's the smart money on how helpful this bill is politically?
Well, first, I would say actual governance is messy. And so it doesn't necessarily always lend itself, to those great, clever bumper sticker lines that we hear in political campaigns. That said, I think for the Democrats, what this bill is really about on a political level is restoring some of the faith of Democratic voters in President Biden and in the congressional Democrats. If you look at recent polling, Biden has been losing a ton of ground with his own party. And so what you see in here are things that are, it's a smaller piece, but these are things that matter a lot to the Democratic base that are unlikely to have a significant effect on inflation, which is the sort of overarching issue of this midterm election right now. It's not likely to have a significant effect on inflation, before the midterm elections in November. And so really, I think that what this is about is rallying Democrats, making them feel that the president is looking out for them, and making them feel that the president is capable and competent of getting things done.
Before I let you go, and just to be fair, I refer to the bill as the Don't Say Gay bill. That is what critics call it. The bill is actually called the Parental Rights and Education Act. That name is what critics have referred to the bill as, just to be clear. Before I let you go, Jonathan, President Biden referred to this bill as a compromise. Were there any big things that did not make it into the bill that he wanted?
I mean, I think most of his agenda that he wanted didn't make it into the bill. The big thing that did was the climate piece. But I mean, if you go back to when he first introduced this legislation with all sorts of, pieces and arms to it, to help parents with children in terms of paying for kids, child tax credit type things, education funding, those kinds of things. A lot of it went away. But what he's left with is something that's pretty substantial. Obviously, the progressive wing of the party cares a lot about climate change. There's a huge investment in renewable energy. And I think, whether it's Democrats or really anybody else, the cost of prescription drugs is out of control. It's not just Biden that thinks that. President Trump tried to do something about it. Republicans in Congress have tried to do something about it. And now Democrats in Congress and President Biden are doing something about it.
All right. Thank you, John. That's NBC senior politics reporter Jonathan Allen. Still to come, tension over Taiwan. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi could be making a trip there. What could that mean for America's tensions with China? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Today, President Biden and China's President Xi Jinping spoke for more than 2 hours. One hot topic of conversation, Taiwan. This self-governed island of about 24 million people is an increasingly tense subject. China claims that Taiwan is its territory. According to a White House readout of the call, Mr. Biden said American policy on Taiwan has not changed. The U.S. strongly opposes changing the status quo or upsetting peace in the Taiwan Strait. Chinese state media claims that President Xi warned President Biden against, quote, playing with fire. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is preparing for a potential trip to Taiwan. She would be the most senior U.S. lawmaker to visit since Newt Gingrich went 25 years ago. Last week, President Biden said that U.S. military officials did not think the trip was a good idea. China has also expressed opposition to the speaker's visit and threatened to retaliate. Joining us now is columnist Gordon Chang. His books include The Coming Collapse of China and The Great U.S.-China Tech War. Mr. Chang, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Joshua.
Let's begin at the beginning, perhaps, for people who have not been following the drama over Taiwan. Why is Taiwan such a thing for China? Why is it so important?
Well, for China, it's a question of legitimacy. Now, China considers Taiwan to be Chinese. Now, the people in Taiwan don't view that way. We know that from self-identification surveys. But Beijing makes that case. And it is a vibrant democracy. It is prosperous. And it proves that the contentions of the Communist Party that the Chinese people can't govern themselves, it proves those to be false. So as long as Taiwan is a democracy, it is a critical, actually existential threat to the Communist Party of China.
Is this a situation similar to what we had seen in Hong Kong, where Beijing had kind of cracked down as sort of, feeling threatened by this kind of independent territory, or is this a different kind of conflict in Hong Kong?
There are elements that are similar, and that's an important question. Basically, Beijing developed this one country, two systems formula that applies in Hong Kong. They developed that for Taiwan. Now, they applied it first in Hong Kong, and since it hasn't worked in Hong Kong, it's convinced the people in Taiwan that they should not be ruled by Beijing. And we have seen that by dramatic shifts in popular opinion as the problems in Hong Kong became more evident, especially in 2019. So there are elements that are very much the same that relate to Hong Kong and Taiwan.
So is that why Speaker Pelosi's visit would feel so inflammatory? Because it would feel like a major democracy affirming another democracy and kind of speaking to that sort of failed, two systems approach that China had attempted? Is that why this is so contentious?
I think that that's one of the reasons. We got to remember, though, that Beijing right now is involved in a number of military provocations. They talk about Taiwan, and we focus in on it. But at this moment, there are Chinese troops deep into Indian-controlled territory in the Himalayas. This month, we have seen very belligerent Chinese activity in the South China Sea at the Second Thomas Shoal of the Philippines. And there have been Chinese ships in Japanese territorial waters around the Senkakus in the East China Sea. I think Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, he's got some really serious problems inside the Chinese economy, the debt crisis, the banking crisis. And so I think that he needs a crisis, and Taiwan has sort of presented itself as the opportunity for him to lash out and to sort of divert the attention of the Chinese people from his mistakes at home.
Elaborate on that a little bit, because some of the Chinese debt crisis has been pretty fascinating, right? With some of these huge real estate companies like Evergrande with enormous amounts of debt and having to sort of kind of remake themselves to just continue to exist. That feels very shaky. But then you have China kind of with very intense rhetoric against the U.S. Here's part of the government's readout of the call. One quote reads, quote, "Those who play with fire will perish by it. It is hoped that the U.S. will be clear-eyed about this," unquote. So with all of that that's going on, Gordon Chang, how serious do you think China would be about actually posting up on the U.S. and doing something bellicose and belligerent if they didn't like the way that this possible visit goes?
I think that, first of all, the rhetoric is ominous, and it's more ominous than we have heard in the past. But I think Beijing's reaction would be informed by what they believed President Biden would do. If they believe that Biden was not going to support the Pelosi visit, then I think Beijing might actually try something like declare a no-fly zone over Taiwan before the speaker arrives. But if they believe that the president is fully behind this trip and supports it and is behind Taiwan, then I think Beijing will slink away, because probably at this point, Xi Jinping doesn't want to take on the full might, not only of the United States, but also of countries in the region, which would rally to Taiwan, especially Japan.
Do we have any sense of what Speaker Pelosi might do if she made this trip to Taiwan? I mean, are they going to be talking policy? Is it a trade visit? Is it mostly just photo ops and handshakes? What might the agenda look like?
I think that the most important thing would be the photo ops and the handshakes, because symbolism is extremely important to Beijing. And if she did nothing but a photo op, that would be 95% of the visit. Now, of course, she could talk about a free trade agreement. She could talk about Taiwan's participation in the World Health Assembly. There are a number of very and arms sales. But I really don't think that that's the purpose of the visit. The purpose of the visit, the speaker understands, is to demonstrate America's support for Taiwan.
I know I have to let you go in a second, but there's a lot. As you mentioned, there's a lot of things that China is doing on the world stage right now, some of them highly bellicose, as in the South China Sea, Taiwan, the Himalayas, and so on. Some of them with just major investments around the world. Sri Lanka, the removal of its president and the unrest in the streets as a result of China pouring huge amounts of money in Sri Lanka, and then that creating issues and the people demanding change. What are you most focused on right now in terms of what China is doing in general? Is it the economic piece? Is it the military piece? Is it the rhetoric? What are you paying the most attention to before we go?
The most important thing, I think, is the debt crisis in China. There's too much debt, and we don't know exactly how much, but if you said 350% of gross domestic product, that would be, I think, a good estimate. Some people might say more because China's been inflating its GDP statistics. I think that that is driving a lot of Chinese external behavior. Remember, Chinese foreign policy is the most important thing is the maintenance of Communist Party rule. And if the Communist Party feels insecure at home, it always does feel insecure, but even more insecure than usual, then it's going to be more belligerent than usual. So it's the internal stuff that I worry about the most because that will radiate out.
Gordon Chang, I find this fascinating. I think what's going on with China should be a much bigger story. People should not sleep on what's happening on China. And I appreciate you coming on to help explain some of it to us. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it. So thank you, Joshua.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in a moment, including deadly flooding in the South that's left many people unaccounted for, a merger that could shake up America's airline industry, and a follow-up to our report about using rap lyrics as criminal evidence in court. Tonight's headlines begin with the deadly flash floods in Kentucky. Officials now say at least 8 people have died. Many more are missing or stranded after record-breaking rainfall. Moments ago, Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear tweeted that he's made a direct request to President Biden for federal assistance. He also told NBC's Lester Holt the death toll will probably increase.
This is by far the worst flooding disaster, at least of my lifetime in Kentucky. It has wiped out what we believe are hundreds of homes. We have half of some of our counties underwater. Well, we're going to lose double-digit lives.
NBC's Maggie Vespa joins us now from the town of Hazard in southeastern Kentucky. Hey, Maggie, how are things on the ground tonight?
Joshua, in a word, they're kind of pure chaos at this point. I mean, just to show you kind of the power behind these floodwaters, this behind me was a church, and now it's basically a hole in the ground surrounded by cinder blocks, and then you can see more cinder blocks tossed on the ground behind it. Behind that, you go way back, you can see in the trees, the bulk of the building was just tossed into those trees behind me. And again, it's just one instance, but we've been seeing example after example of damage like this throughout Kentucky and the parts of Virginia that were slammed by this torrential rain and by these floods. And then just to kind of run through the dire numbers that we've had throughout the day, the latest, according to the governor of Kentucky, to Lester Holt, just before nightly news, 8 people now confirmed dead here in Kentucky. Officials say also the missing count is undoubtedly on the rise, but they've been so slammed with rescues on the ground, they haven't even been able to keep an accurate count of the missing. This morning it was 20. I've been told it's gone up exponentially, essentially, from there. Joshua.
The shots of the rain are kind of hard to fathom, and we know Governor Beshear has said that even though there are parts of Kentucky that flood very regularly, nothing like this. This is not normal for even parts of the state that flood frequently. What are they expecting going forward? More of this, or are they kind of hoping that they'll get some dry weather and this flood water will be allowed to recede?
Well, if you talk to people here on the ground, they'll tell you they're praying for dry weather. They're praying this doesn't get worse. But the governor was really clear. He told people that they could expect, he believes, 2 to 4 inches from what scientists have been telling him overnight. That would be less than what they got last night. But this is obviously an area that is now beyond saturated, beyond soaked. It can't take that much more water. And everybody's also hoping that those predictions are right. You know, frankly, a lot of scientists were predicting the system would go south of this area for the most part, and it kind of turned and it hit this area, which caught a lot of people off guard. So they're really hoping for some dry or at least drier weather overnight. If there is rain, they're hoping it's minimal, but everybody at this point is bracing for the worst. Joshua.
Talk about the help on the ground, the relief effort, the recovery effort, supplies that may be coming in from elsewhere in the state or other states. Do folks have what they need right now to clean up and rebuild, or are they still waiting for more resources?
No, they don't have what they need, frankly. They're definitely still waiting. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that power is still out for, according to the governor, 25,000 people plus. That has yet to be restored. So imagine going through this. Perhaps your house is damaged, perhaps it's destroyed, or even if you're still in your home, you haven't had power throughout this, what I can tell you is a very hot and sticky day, and you're just kind of wrapping your mind around the devastation around you. So that's a big statistic. And then as far as people who actually do need to rebuild, the governor just today declared the state of emergency just a few hours ago, and that deploys the National Guard. It activates the National Guard on the ground. They also say FEMA is on the ground. But he was really clear today in his press conference. He said this won't take months to recover from. This will take years. Joshua.
Yeah, Governor Beshear told Tom Yamas just a little while ago that he's been in contact with the White House and that hopefully more resources will be coming very soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maggie. That's NBC's Maggie Vespa with the view from the ground in Hazard, Kentucky. Let's update you on the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are on a counteroffensive to retake the southern city of Kherson from Russian forces. Britain's defense ministry says that campaign is gaining momentum. Meanwhile, Russian forces have also intensified shelling key Ukrainian cities, and millions of tons of grain are still sitting at Ukraine's ports, waiting to be shipped under a new deal. NBC's Josh Letterman has more from Kyiv. Hey, Josh.
Joshua, for weeks now, the Ukrainians have been signaling that they intended to undertake an offensive to retake the captured area of Kherson from the Russians. Today, we heard from British intelligence saying that that effort is now gaining momentum, including with 3 attacks by the Ukrainians on key bridges that link the area of Kherson to other Russian-held territory. And it includes missiles that attack the Antonivsky Bridge, the most important crossing over the Dnieper River to Kherson City, as the Ukrainians try to cut off Russian troops from the rest of their allies and their supply lines, hoping that eventually the Russians will either retreat from Kherson or surrender. But that momentum from the Ukrainians comes as the Russians are renewing their rocket and missile attacks on Ukraine, including the first rockets to land in the Kyiv region in weeks. That attack targeting a military unit about 20 miles north of where I am right now in Kyiv, which has really shattered the sense of calm that has set in here in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv in recent weeks after there had been no successful attacks here in some time. Today we also heard from President Zelensky commemorating Ukrainian Day of Statehood, which is a holiday that President Zelensky created just last year, meaning this is the first time Ukrainians are able to celebrate it, obviously coming with added significance as Ukrainians are fighting for the survival of their independence and their country today. President Zelensky saying that every day is Ukrainian Day of Statehood. Joshua?
Thank you, sir. That's NBC's Josh Letterman reporting from Kyiv. Now an update to a story we discussed this week about rap lyrics being used as criminal evidence in court. Top music industry officials are supporting a new bill to limit that. The RAP Act would prevent using an artist's lyrics against them in criminal and civil cases. The legislation has the support of the Recording Academy, which awards the Grammys, Atlantic Records, and Universal Music Group, despite the name not part of our parent company, NBC Universal, just to be clear. This week, we told you about the arrest of rappers Young Thug and Gunna in Atlanta. They're indicted on gang-related drug, weapon, and violent offenses. Prosecutors cited their lyrics as overt acts connecting them to crimes. JetBlue is preparing to acquire Spirit Airlines. Today, the companies announced their merger, absorbing Spirit's assets under the JetBlue name. Together, the two airlines would create the 5th largest U.S. carrier. It would account for about 10% of the market. A turnaround would do them both good. A Wall Street Journal ranking named Spirit and JetBlue the 2 worst airlines of 2021. The deal values Spirit at $3.8 billion. It comes one day after Frontier Airlines' plans to merge with Spirit fell apart. The JetBlue merger has yet to clear federal antitrust reviews. Coming up, computer chips made in the USA. Congress is advancing a bill to boost America's semiconductor industry. We'll explain just ahead. Stay close. A lot of products from dishwashers to cars are in short supply because of the same hard-to-find part: computer chips. A new bill in Congress could change that. This afternoon, the House passed the CHIPS and Science Act. It aims to boost production of semiconductors in the U.S. The bill passed the Senate yesterday, and now it heads to President Biden's desk. Right now, the U.S. makes about 12% of the world's chips. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says this act will reduce America's reliance on China.
This is sort of a Sputnik moment where America realized, this time it wasn't Russia but China, another rival power, would get way ahead of us if we didn't pull out all the stops. And this legislation is the first large step in pulling out all of those stops so that we can stay number one.
Joining us now is Jonathan Klamkin, the CEO and president of Illuma. It's a semiconductor company specializing in sensors and communications. Mr. Klamkin, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Tell us more about Illuma. What do you do? What do you make? What do you specialize in?
Illuma is a U.S.-based leading-edge semiconductor company, and we specialize in LiDAR sensors for autonomous vehicles. And what sets our technology apart is our ability to scale and to be cost-effective.
LiDAR, that's kind of like radar, but using laser light, the scanning technology on autonomous vehicles, right?
That's correct. This is a critical technology for autonomous vehicles. And in the coming years, we'll see more and more of our new cars equipped with LiDARs.
How's business these days? I would imagine that with autonomous vehicles on the rise, that your company should be doing, I imagine, pretty well. But how's business?
Yeah, we're an early stage company, but I would say we have significant traction with some potential customers.
So it sounds like early stage, like sales are still kind of on the way, still in the design, development, R&D, marketing stage, which is common for early stage companies. I'm interested in how this bill would help your company. It sounds like it's a little more geared to existing chip makers, the Intels and the AMDs of the world, but what would it mean for you?
Yeah, so the CHIPS Act addresses three important aspects of the U.S. semiconductor industry: supply chain security, national security, and innovation. And yes, you're correct. On supply chain and national security, the big semiconductor companies will play a key role here by increasing semiconductor manufacturing capacity onshore in the USA. But on the last area I mentioned, innovation, this is extremely important. We in the US are the best at innovation, but we need resources to continue to innovate. So big companies are not really suited to innovate. Small companies like Illuma and universities excel at innovation. So for us, Illuma has developed this highly disruptive technology that we believe is critical for automotive LiDAR. And in the future, LiDARs will be on all new vehicles for safety. So the CHIPS Act could help us increase our manufacturing capacity, but also help us continue to innovate by providing funding for research and development.
I lived in Silicon Valley in San Francisco for 6.5 years. And as much as I think a lot of tech companies have very noble aims in terms of how they do business, at the end of the day, when you're talking to those venture capitalists up and down Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, they want a 10, 20, 50, 100 times return on their investment. You got to manage costs. And it just makes, it sounds like, more sense to manufacture somewhere else around the world that's just cheaper to get you off the ground. Why manufacture in the U.S. when other countries might just be cheaper?
Well, yeah, I think it's unfortunate that in recent years, lots of semiconductor manufacturing has gone overseas, but that, occurred somewhat naturally. Other countries invested heavily in semiconductor manufacturing. It became attractive for U.S. companies to buy their chips from abroad. But for two reasons, you really want to be in the U.S. One, if we have direct access to that advanced manufacturing capability, we're well positioned to innovate. And also, we really need to secure our supply chains. We've learned in the last couple of years, especially, how critical semiconductors are for us. So having that technology and that manufacturing onshore is absolutely critical moving forward.
Presuming that this bill is signed and that it does become law, how soon do you expect for your business to feel and notice the impact of this new law before we go?
Yeah, I think the passing of the bill is really just the starting point. We heard from Senator Schumer earlier that this is the first step. This was apparently necessary for a number of major fab construction projects to break ground. But this bill is massive. It's unlike anything we've seen in our industry. And the way the funds will be dispersed and managed through various government agencies is quite complex. I think what's critical moving forward is that we ensure, that small companies like Illuma and universities can continue to innovate. And we can do that by working closely with big semiconductor fabs and companies, perhaps when new cutting-edge technologies are ready to scale and commercialize.
Jonathan Klamkin, appreciate you making time to talk to us. Startups are no easy business, so I wish you all the best of luck with your company. And I thank you for making time for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
How did Derek Jeter reach his potential? And how could that help you reach yours? A docu-series explores how he rose to success. We'll meet the director of The Captain before we go. Yankee shortstop Derek Jeter is one of the greatest baseball players who ever lived. But how did he get that way? A new documentary series from ESPN is breaking down his 20-year career. Derek Jeter has 5 World Series rings, 14 All-Star selections, and a place in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Few athletes reach that level of greatness. But greatness is something we can all aspire to. The journey is not always pretty, but hard work and the right support system can pay off. The series The Captain tells Jeter's story, including how he earned his nickname, Mr. November.
Somebody has to be. Derek's mom and dad in attendance.
3-2 pitch. Swung on a drill to right field. Going back Sanders on the track at the wall. See ya! See ya! See ya! A home run by Derek Jeter. Oh, what a ball game! A game-winning walk-off home run by Derek Jeter. He is Mr. November.
Joining us now is Randy Watkins, the director of The Captain. The series is available on ESPN. Episodes 3 and 4 are airing tonight. Mr. Watkins, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's Wilkins.
I beg your pardon, Wilkins. Why did I call you Watkins?
Yeah, it's all right. It's fine.
Let's do it again. Take 2. Joining us now. No, I'm kidding. I watched episodes 1 and 2. It's really good.
Thank you.
It's really good. And what I like about it is you don't have to be a Yankees fan, so people from Boston and Cleveland can watch it too, to appreciate Derek Jeter's story. What were you most interested in about Derek Jeter before you started directing this documentary?
I think it was everything that was off the field. I was really interested in his biracial identity as a black man growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Really interested in how family impacted his life and shaped the way that he viewed the world and interacted with others. And I was also curious in the way that the world perceived him and received him and the perceptions that were built around Derek Jeter and why they were the way that they were and why they existed. So I think I wanted to deconstruct, and we talked before we got on air about demystifying Derek, and that was certainly one of my intentions.
One of the things that stands out early on is that when he started his career, he wasn't, like, he didn't descend from the heavens just full grown. He had a lot of screw-ups early on.
Yes.
He really had to kind of work his way into being what he became.
Yeah, and I think part of the story, too, is that because he grew up in Michigan, he didn't face the toughest competition in the world. So I think that the adjustment to the professional level and the emotional toll and mental toll that it had on him really reflected his background and the toughness that he had to have and the foundation that he had with his family, and the ability to overcome all of that really goes back to his parents and his sister. So we really wanted to focus on that and, again, demystify this idea that Derek was perfect and, like, everything was just kind of built out for him to succeed. It wasn't the case, and I think in order for him to succeed, he had to lean on his family.
Talk more about that a little bit. I don't know what your background was like. I know what I was taught coming up as a black boy growing up about what life would be like as someone who had insanely high aspirations and the kind of world that we engage as black men, and that's a significant thread of this story. It's just being prepared for the world.
We have the same experience. So, and I think Derek did as well, but the complications come when your mother is white, your father is black, you don't look like your parents, and the outside world is constantly defining who you are. I think for the both of us, you know, people know that we're black men and there's really no question about it, but for Derek, there's this added layer of everybody defining who he is, and he doesn't have control over it. So I think navigating that makes it a little bit more difficult for him. Again, his parents were fantastic in letting him know who he was at the time, who he's going to be. Can't was a curse word in their house, and I think part of that was because he's biracial and he's going to have to overcome more than most people will have to. And yeah, I mean, I think that built the foundation for who he is today.
A lot of the series, at least the first few episodes, talk about some of the friends he made, obviously Alex Rodriguez of the Seattle Mariners, and some of the rivalries, including Nomar Garciaparra from the Boston Red Sox. Here's a clip from episode 3 about that rivalry. Watch.
I didn't truly believe they were just better than us that year. It wasn't the belief they were better. Sometimes you're like, man, we lost. Yeah, they were better. We didn't lose to the better team, but we just weren't good enough to win this series.
That's what losers say. Every loser say we had a better team, but we didn't play as well. So, sorry, Nomar, we had a better team, man.
Talk about competitiveness. I've heard Gino Auriemma of UConn talk about the difference between losing and getting beat. Like, if you did your best, but the other team's a little better, you got beat, you can deal with that. If you didn't do what you were supposed to do, you lost. He don't like to lose. I agree with Gino Auriemma. I don't like to lose. I'm super competitive. But talk about the role of just that competitive, like, we walk on the diamond having already beat you. It just hasn't happened in 9 innings yet. Where does that come from?
It's interesting because I think if Derek was sitting here, he wouldn't agree with Gino. A loss is a loss. There's no line. There's no way to break it down or, you know, put it in its own categories. It's a failure. You know, every loss is a failure. So I think for him, he lived and breathed winning. And I put him in the pantheon with Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan, that everything came down to winning. Even the way that he interacted with the media, all of that was by design because he didn't want distractions from the goal of winning championships. So I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned from Derek is just that edge. Like, you would see him smile and he's joking around on the field and you could tell he's having fun, but underneath that was a stone cold killer who wanted to win. I mean, you know, that's the bottom line, and he was consumed by it. He still is today.
I know I got to let you go in a minute, but how much, having done this docu-series on Derek Jeter, how much of his success is just him, as opposed to the things that anybody can do if they want to aspire to do something great?
I think it's a balance. I think some of it is just his focus, his confidence. He's relentless in his pursuits. So I think that that's unique to him. But I also think he had a great support system. I think he ended up with the right organization in the right city. He had the right team around him. He had the right manager. So I think a lot of it is, you know, it's a combination, but I also think he was blessed because he's a good guy. You know, and I think that you're rewarded if you're good to other people and your intentions are where they should be. So I think that he was blessed in a way. I think that balance comes from being a good guy and focusing on the right things.
Anything you didn't get answered from this documentary that you wanted to get answered? Were there any questions that are still unanswered for you about Derek Jeter?
No. I mean, I think I'm proud of us because I think that we covered a lot. For someone that's so private that didn't want to talk about things, I think we accomplished a lot.
Well, you got some pretty amazing access. It is a fantastic. The first 2 episodes were just so good.
Thank
Randy
you, I appreciate it.
Wilkins. Wilkins. We're going to change that in CGI later for the re-air so nobody knows I called you something else.
That's all right.
But what they really want to know you for is being the director of The Captain, a fabulous docu-series that is airing on ESPN, streaming on ESPN+. Episodes 3 and 4 air tonight. Thanks for making time for us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for being with us tonight as well. You can send us your thoughts and questions on any of the topics we discussed tonight. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. Or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow, and always swing for the fences. Don't settle for less. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.